Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and in this episode of Fantasy Lore and More, Beka Gremikova is joining me to talk about her book, Unexpected Encounters of a Draconic Kind and Other Stories. And that sounds very cool. So,
Thank you.
welcome and tell us about it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
So, Unexpected Encounters of a Draconic Kind and Other Stories is a collection of fantasy, science fiction, and thriller and comedy short stories. And it is published by Snow Rage Press, and it's available on Amazon in paperback and hardcover, and then wide in ebook. So you should be able to get it anywhere that you prefer to buy your ebooks. And yeah, it explores a wide variety of different stories and genres, and it's a lot of them center around fairy tales and mythology, because those are things I'm interested in studying and learning more about. So I will read the blurb.
Sure.
Encounters, whether with magic or science, expected or unexpected, they can change our minds, our destinies, even our world. In this collection of 22 short tales, journey across multiple genres alongside various characters, including a mother who gathers dragon scales to provide for her family despite a perilous jungle and her own self-doubt, a young half-human, half-mermaid girl on the search for her father with murderous soldiers on her heels, an opera singer turned ghost hunter attempting to thwart a phantom who just won't stop interfering with her act, a family at risk of losing their humanity to the moon as its magic wreaks a monstrous change within them, and an alien on a rescue mission to save her best friend's children from those who wish them harm. Full of comedy and tragedy, heartache and hope, monsters and magic, these stories are an encounter that just might change you too.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So they vary in length. Some of them are just like short flash fiction pieces, and other ones are a bit longer. Many of them started out as flash fiction pieces on Havoc Publishing's website. They publish Monday to Friday daily little flash fiction pieces in various genres. So I published a whole bunch on there between like 2019 and 2022, selected kind of the best of those and expanded them into longer short stories to make this collection. So,
oh, wow. So yeah. Do the stories, they don't connect to each other. They're just,
no.
They're all different.
Yeah, some of them are set in like the same world and are loosely connected, just through like land masses, I guess, are the same, but not necessarily characters. So they take place in like different time periods in the same world, but you can definitely read them each on their own without them having to be connected.
Okay. So are they connected by like theme or anything?
Yes. So most of these stories revolve around, I guess, encountering things from your past, either from your past or how random strangers can change each other's lives. Um, but most of them do revolve kind of around facing, I guess, past traumas and either overcoming them or having them drag you down. There's a few different tragedies mixed in there, but most of them end on a more hopeful note. So there's a little bit of something for everyone in it.
Okay. So that's cool.
Thank you.
And you wrote them. That's cool that you wrote them over time. Were there like prompts you were writing to? Like
yeah, Havoc has different monthly prompts. So many of them were written to the specific monthly theme that they had going on.
That's cool.
Example, yeah, one of them, one of the stories in here is a Rapunzel retelling, and the Rapunzel character tastes emotions. So Havoc's monthly theme that month happened to be taste. So that was kind of what inspired the idea of adding that twist to the Rapunzel story. So she's addicted to the Rapunzel leaf, and she can taste people's emotions, and it's kind of an exploration of addiction and restoration and recovery.
Oh wow. Does it say, do you say in the book which ones were which ones were written to prompts and what the prompts were? Just, I'm always curious. maybe I'm weird, but like I'm always curious.
No, that's a good question. I don't have that included in here. Well, many of them were first published on Havoc. There's a couple mixed in there that weren't. They had different beginnings, so I didn't really include the specific prompts in there. But you can find the original flash fiction pieces still on Havoc's website. Most of them are unrecognizable because for the collection, I expanded the plots and worlds and characters for many of them to a certain extent where they're completely different stories now. Some of them have different endings, different twists, and basically they kind of just share the same title, and that's all that they have in common.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the originals were on havoc.com, and these have been that's really cool that you've expanded them and made them into, that's, I like short stories and short story anthologies, so that's why I'm asking so many questions.
Oh, no worries. I love
always curious.
Too.
Yeah, they don't always like, some anthologies like will say like why people wrote them or like what their inspiration was, but like not all of them do, and I'm always like, why did you write this? Where did what was there a prompt? Did somebody say something to you? Did you just have a bad, like, I'm always curious, especially with like short stories, because they can go in so many different ways, and like with books we have like tropes, and like we have like so many like boxes that we want to put the different plots and stories that we read into, but like, and like short stories like can kind of go anywhere, right?
Well, yeah, actually I kind of explained kind of my reasoning behind like what I wrote in I have an introduction in the book, if you'd like I can share it, and it kind of goes into the
Would
reasoning.
you mind?
And yeah, no problem,
because this is really interesting, and like this is like we had one other short story, I think we had one other anthology, but they were written about a specific world and tying into a series. Like this is very different. So yeah, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So when I was 15, I wanted to be a novelist, and throughout high school and university, I started drafting multiple books and novellas. Then, during my second year of university, the mental health issues I'd struggled with for most of my life slammed into me full force, and suddenly the creativity that had once been a refuge turned into a curse. Soon, my long-form fiction became too much of a weight to bear. I couldn't focus on one idea long enough to finish a story. Frustration and anxiety settled in, as well as a kind of hopelessness. Then I discovered Havoc Publishing's website, where they publish daily speculative fiction pieces. I learned that I didn't have to write longer narratives to still be a storyteller, and over the course of 2019 to 2022, I dedicated myself to flash fiction. Slowly, my heart and confidence started to heal until I could once more face long-form fiction without grappling with creativity-crushing fear. Many of the stories in this book started as those flash fiction pieces and have now been expanded into longer short stories to further explore the worlds and characters introduced in the original 1,000-word tales. These stories explore a variety of themes: forgiveness, reconciliation, justice, mercy, and family, just to name a few. My hope is that these stories will encourage, comfort, and challenge you in some way, and if the humorous ones can provide a chuckle or two, even better. But most of all, I pray that for those of you struggling in your writing journeys, this collection can provide hope. Sometimes it's the small things that add up to something bigger than you imagined, and even if your path doesn't look the same as other people's, it is still valid. And no matter how short or long a story may be, no matter how short or long a time it takes to write and or publish it, that story is worthy of celebration. So that's kind of
a beautiful message.
Oh, thank you.
I like how you end that like, no matter how short or long, it's worthy of attention. That's so touches me right here.
Oh, thank you.
Heart in the feels.
Oh, yeah, so that's kind of the heart behind this collection. Because yeah, it was a very rough couple of years there, writing and health-wise, especially in a community where so often, especially in fantasy and science fiction, the focus is very much on longer works. So when you see everyone else working on novels and you're working on shorter pieces, sometimes you can kind of get into your own head about it, like, and yeah, each piece is worthy, and not one is better than the other. Each has an audience waiting for it, and that's something I've really learned over the last few years, to kind of just embrace where I'm at and just go with the flow and see where creativity takes you.
No, and that's such an important message. And you're right, like some people are writing novels, but I feel like fantasy has a lot of space in it for shorter works too, because
Exactly.
there's so many, like, how many times you want to break the world? Sometimes you just want to deal with the smaller problems,
Yep.
and they're just as worthy of attention. So yeah. Oh, this is awesome. Do you?
Oh, thank you.
Well, we already had a excerpt. Do you want to read another excerpt?
Yes, I will read a story excerpt this time. Now
Yes,
that you know the heart behind the story, you can get the story.
Now let's get the imagination part of the story. This is so fun. Thanks for coming on here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
So the story I'm going to read from is not the first one. It's one kind of from the middle, but it's a science fiction story in here, and it's called Just a Hench, and it is a super villain and hero story, and it's kind of a little bit of a take or an exploration of different tropes from like DC and Marvel and that kind of thing, because I do enjoy those kinds of media, and I sometimes get frustrated with the storylines in those. So I wanted to kind of give my own take on it. So, just a hench. If everything goes well, today is my final day as a good, lawful citizen. Or as good and lawful as some supervillain's spawn can be, anyways. The spaceship airlock whooshes open to reveal a sprawling front lobby with holograms flickering over the walls. Some of the holograms boast the leering faces of this agency's most famous supervillains, their smiles deceptively wide and friendly, while others showcase some of the most famous moments in modern villain history. On one such screen, a recording of a standoff plays, with a hero and villain staring each other down, guns clutched in their hands. It strikes me as ironic that, no matter how advanced our technology has become, our favorite weapons haven't changed much. And the sight of those gleaming guns makes my mouth go dry. Even before the blast of a gunshot on screen, I've dropped into a crouch. Instinctively, I peer over my shoulder. There's nothing behind me other than the airlock, and, past that, my docked spaceship. All at once, reality sinks in again. Nobody stands behind me with a gun aimed at my head. Not anymore. And not yet. Because the truth is, if I get a placement here, there will be someone eventually. After all, that's just daily life as a villain's henchwoman. And since I apparently can't get a decent job anywhere else in this cursed galaxy, it's either embrace villainy or starve. At least bad guys pay well. I have to keep that in mind, or I'll talk myself back through the airlock and out into space. Can I help you? Asks the nasally voice of the front desk receptionist. She stares down at me, her eyebrows raised. The expression reminds me of my former boss just before I got fired from my last job because we found discrepancies in your background check. I.e., we found out you're the daughter of a supervillain, and we don't want that filth around here. Doesn't seem to matter that my mother abandoned us when I was 5. The intergalactic laws are great at punishing the innocent and rewarding the criminal. As far as I know, my mother's probably bought herself a private planet with all the money she's stolen from various governments. When I was little, Dad tried really hard to hide the news reports from me, But I always heard the stories of how Spade outwitted even the most high-tech security measures and escaped with spaceships full of treasures. And he couldn't hide the planetary agents, or Mom's rivals, who liked to drop in for friendly visits. At first, I did nothing more than ask about her, probing for any clues to her whereabouts. Then one night, a man held a gun to my head as his compatriots made a holographic recording to send out across the galaxy, daring my mother to make an appearance or leave me to die. She never showed up. Dad ended up killing multiple men, and now he's been left to rot in prison. My mother's enemies leave me alone now. They've realized that if she wouldn't come back after that, she won't come back for anything. Can I help you? The receptionist repeats, tapping her nails against the smooth metal of a control panel built into her desk. Her crimson-painted lips purse. Clearing my throat, I straighten. No matter how much I want to turn around, dash out the door, and fly away, I need this. And as much as possible, I must look the part of a competent henchwoman. Confident, collected, prepared. Even if I feel the exact opposite. Pardon me, I'm here for a placement interview. I quickly slip out of my outer spacesuit, revealing the slick black trousers and tunic I was told to wear. As I stash my spacesuit in the small locker beside the receptionist's desk, I can only hope nobody will notice my worn, holey shoes. No matter how many pairs I buy, I can't keep my dog from destroying them. Without a word, the receptionist tilts her head to the panel in front of her, where the outline of a fingerprint glows bright green. I swallow. They don't take chances here, apparently. Their software is much more advanced than at my last job. It'd taken them months to find out my true identity. A fake name won't help me here, not if they already have access to my home planet's data system. I press my thumb to the print. Within moments, it's my face, thin, ghostly pale, deep-set blue eyes, staring out from the huge holographic screens. Data flashes across the screens, too fast for me to focus on, except for my name. Liz Barden? The receptionist gives an incredulous laugh. You're Spade Barden's daughter? She looks me up and down before shaking her head. Never thought we'd see you here. Life didn't give me much choice, I want to say. Instead, I murmur, there are so many opportunities for someone like me in this field, meaning someone desperate enough to abandon their skills and talents and do bloody grunt work. She smirks. Your father must be so proud. My fingers clench into fists at my sides, but I can't let her nettle me. If I get this placement, villains will treat me a lot worse. They're not known for being doting on their henchpeople. If I can't take a bit of ribbing, I'll never survive. And that's all I want, to make enough money to live comfortably and maybe, just maybe, even post Dad's bail one day. If this life doesn't kill me first. So I shrug. He can't complain. He's in jail. Took out a few government agents, didn't he? She says. Maybe once he's out, he'll join you here. Wouldn't that be nice? Oh, yes, because I definitely want my father trapped further in this murderous world. I paste a grin on my face to hide the tension welling within me. So nice, I echo. Henchwoman tip number 1. Always echo a villain's phraseology. Don't bother with original thoughts. They don't care to hear them. The receptionist offers an approving nod, as though she understands exactly what I did. She waves me past the desk, where a series of glowing footprints on the floor point towards a narrow hallway. Nadine will interview you. A long, lean smile stretches her mouth. Good luck. She's a bit of a hard case. What do you mean? I ask. The receptionist leans back in her chair and crosses her arms. Very few of the people she interviews make it past the first one. She's looking for nothing but the best stooges. The twitch in her lips suggests she doesn't think I'm capable of filling that role. And what do I really have to offer? I couldn't get into the best schools due to my mother's criminal activities. I've been stuck scrounging for whatever scraps I can get. Maybe I won't even make a very good henchwoman. My eyes sting, but I blink back the tears. I can't cry, not here. I stride down the hallway, following the glowing footprints until they end at a bright green door with a single blue button. I press it, and the door slides aside. Seated at the small desk within is a short, slim woman with dark hair. Her fingers fly across the holographic screen in front of her, her brow furrowed in concentration. As I enter, she glances up, and her sharp features flicker. Instead of a narrow face with high cheekbones and a thin mouth, I glimpse a rounder face with large eyes and full lips. Then the moment passes, and the stern expression returns. She must be using some kind of personal hologram to hide her true appearance. Maybe that's something I'll have to research if I get hired. The woman, Nadine, looks back down at her screen and flicks her finger across it. For a moment, she scans the information, then sits back with a nod. "So you're Liz Barden," she says. I nod. "Take a seat." She gestures to the comfy-looking chair on the other side of the desk. I perch on the edge of it, flattening my palms against my knees. Nadine stares down at the screen in front of her as though she's scrolling through a list of questions. Around us, the room is dark, lit only by a few built-in lights that cast an eerie blue-green glow. The chilly air seeps through my thin layer of clothing and into my skin. I resist the urge to shrink back. The chamber makes me feel so small, so insignificant. Just another wannabe henchwoman, just another motor in the spaceship of life, soon to be broken down and cast aside. "It says here you're from planet Iranus and went to school for engineering? Is it true?" she asks. I blink at her. This must be a trick question, a way to figure out if I'm too big for my spacesuit, so to speak. I hunch my shoulders and bow my head in a show of deference. "Doesn't matter," I mutter. Henchwoman tip number 2. Don't get personal. You don't matter as an individual, even if your parents are famous. Your skills don't matter, just what you're willing to sacrifice for the greater bad. Nadine frowns and writes something down on her screen. "That won't fly nowadays, dear." "What do you mean?" My fingertips curl into the soft, stretchy fabric of my trousers. The receptionist certainly acted differently, I think. "Times change," she says, "and that receptionist doesn't know a supervillain from an asteroid. Villains need henchpeople who connect with them, like a family, not as unknown disposables." For a moment, Nadine scowls down at her screen. The light illuminates the crags in her holographic skin and casts light blue streaks through her dark brown hair. Then she glances up at me expectantly. I sigh. "Yes, I went to a local university for engineering." She leans forward, staring at me with more intensity than I would have expected from a dispassionate interviewer. "And?" she asks. Lowering my gaze, I scuff the toe of my boot across the floor. "I graduated top of my class." "That's wonderful," she says. I raise my head. The receptionist told me Nadine was a hard case. What she should have said is that the woman's odd. Why should she be so excited about my education? It's not like I can use it in this job anyways. But I can't say that to the woman who holds my future in her hands. Thank you?" I say. She looks like she wants to say something more, but she shakes her head and clears her throat before checking her control panel again. What what led you to this agency, Liz?" She double-checks the list, and her shoulders stiffen. Then, in a more robotic tone than I've heard her use before, she continues. "Every villain has a sob story. They expect, of course, the same for their henchmen." She drums her fingers against the screen, tap, 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 as if impatient for me to get started on said sob story. Her lips are pinched, too, almost as if she's fighting nerves. Maybe she doesn't enjoy the interview process? Not that I'm enjoying it much either. Nothing like reliving your trauma for the sake of money, right? I stare at the worn toe of my left boot, focusing on its chewed edge, grateful for those tooth-shaped irregularities that keep my mind from spiraling. I say between clenched teeth, "My mother left when I was small. She was a supervillain." Nadine's quiet for a moment. "The infamous Spade Barden." There's a note of bitterness to her tone that nearly makes me look up. Was she one of my mother's many rivals, perhaps? Should I try to bend Nadine in my favor by bad-mouthing Spade? But if they both work at this agency, perhaps that would appear unprofessional. I settle on, "Yeah, her." She can interpret that however she wishes, but it doesn't cross any lines. But now I'm curious, enough to look up and peer closely at her. Do you know her? Not that I want anything to do with my mother, but, well, closure would be nice. An apology, maybe some groveling for good measure. Yes, I guess I do, she says. Unfortunately. Nadine glowers at her screen, tracing some pattern across the buttons that rim the glass. Does she still work here? I ask. Nadine hesitates. You could say she's retired from the villain aspect of her career, or maybe gone into hiding would be more accurate. My nostrils flare. My hunch about buying a private planet to live out the rest of her days is probably right. Do hobbies? She asks sharply. I flinch. Hobbies? This has got to be a trick question. Schooling, I could see. Even family background might have some relevance. But why in the galaxy should any villain care what I do in my spare time? And why would I even have spare time as a henchwoman? Maybe she really is trying to trap me, and the earlier questions were to get my guard down. I cross my arms and barely refrain from shooting her a scowl. Don't have any, I say. Nonsense. She sniffs and adjusts her glasses, which causes her hologram to shift again, her cheeks softening. Everyone does, she says. You must keep your villain occupied during off hours. I pinch the bridge of my nose. What do I enjoy? I've hardly done anything but try to find work the past few years. Traveling, I admit, flushing. My dad and I used to go from planet to planet a lot. I don't mention that a lot of those jaunts were to avoid drop-in visits from government agents. They couldn't harass us if we weren't home. But those trips had been a light during a dark time, and my interest in architecture had been born from viewing the wide array of buildings on each planet, the way each culture built themselves into their environments. She jots that down on her screen, though her hand trembles. I used to fly a bit myself, she says. What else? She wants to know more? Nobody nobody has ever asked anything like that from me. How much would you like to know? I ask. Her eyes seem to shimmer, but I can't tell if that's from the hologram or the lighting. Everything, she says. Who am I to argue? I list all the mundane facts about myself that I can think of. My love for dogs, my favorite cuisine, a delicious spicy noodle bowl from my home planet. All while she listens, enraptured. So enraptured that her hands have stopped moving and now lie flat against her desk. I cut off abruptly. Is any of this relevant? I ask. She blinks again and leans back in her chair. It tells me that you're overqualified. Henchwoman tip number 3. Don't expect love. Don't expect praise. Don't expect to escape. What? I say. Is she kidding? How can you be overqualified for a job that doesn't want any of your special qualities to begin with? She sucks in a deep breath, glances over her shoulder, and turns back to me. She lowers her voice. Surely you don't want to throw all that away to become a henchwoman. I wouldn't be throwing. She leans so far over the desk that I instinctively veer away. Yes, you would be, she says. Villains might use your skills for a while, but then they'll make you wish you never had those gifts at all. Her eyes pin me to the spot, vibrant and fierce despite the unreality of her hologram, which has slid back into place. Why not start a hero agency instead, she suggests. My breath catches in my throat. A what? I say. This has to be a trap. My brain scrambles but comes up with nothing. I peer around the room, searching for hidden cameras and voice recording systems. How can you say that? I insist more loudly. I'd never start a hero agency. She chuckles. Nobody can hear you. Really? I ask. She spreads her arm. Shout at me. But just do it. Her voice crackles with authority this time. Believe me, she says, if they have recording equipment in here, they'd jump at anything that sounds threatening. But if people do, she waves dismissively, I'll tell them it was all part of an experiment. So I yell at her, some wordless scream that bounces off the walls. Surprisingly, it's rather calming to let out all the pent-up tension. Once my shrieks have faded and it's apparent nobody's marching down the hall to arrest me, I settle deeper into my chair, resting my elbows on the arms. We're truly alone. That only gives me more room for the questions bubbling up inside me. I study the woman across from me, who sits primly with her hands folded across her desk. So much of her blends into her environment, as if she's part of the spaceship itself, as if she's left behind her own identity. Whose side are you on? The question rushes out of me like a suddenly released breath. It hangs in the air, sparkling and dangerous. In that stillness, her answer rings as loud as a scream. Yours, she says. She takes my hand, squeezing it gently, as if she's an aunt offering advice or my mom. No, that would be absurd. I nearly laugh at the impossibility. Listen, those of us here are branded by this world, she says, snagging my attention. We're stuck with our choices and everything we've lost because of them. Her voice cracks and her fingers tighten around my hand. Who did you lose? I whisper. She bites her lip, obviously struggling. It took my husband, my child, her eyes well, everything. My stomach turns. I picture a little girl sobbing into her pillow, wishing her mother could come home. I've already lost so much, I choke out. What's a little bit more? Her fingernails bite into my skin. No, she snaps. Don't let them take anything else from you. But where else am I supposed to go? I'm supervillain Spawn. The words choke in my throat, and suddenly I'm bawling. I rip my hand from her grasp and wrap my arms around myself, shaking uncontrollably. She jolts out of her chair and flies around her desk. She crouches in front of me. Are you all right? I can't speak through the sobs. Heat sweeps along my limbs. I must look like a complete idiot. I'm so stupid, I say. Absolutely not. She stands to grip my shoulders, her grasp gentle yet firm. Liz, this world isn't worth your soul. Even if you are supervillain Spawn, she spits out the words. Listen, I have a friend looking to hire someone just like you. Her words settle almost like fog. What? I say. She bends over me to whisper a slew of numbers and letters in my ear. Coordinates, I realize after a mind-numbing moment. Once she repeats them a few times, I commit them to memory as if they're part of an architectural blueprint. Go where those coordinates lead, she says. She returns to her chair. My friend will give you a job until you can pay off whatever you need to, or save up enough to start your own business. She tilts her head. We just want to make sure you're qualified for the work. I.e., someone not enraptured with the idea of supervillainy. Why is your friend doing this? I ask. Nadine bows her head. She's someone who's lost a lot to this world, too, and she wants to help others escape it. She sounds a lot like you, I say. Nadine laughs softly. I wish I could be like her. I think you've succeeded. She snorts. Believe me, I haven't. I can't even escape this world. At least not yet. Not without making a mess, and I'm not ready to do that. I've chosen it too many times, sacrificed too much for it to let me go easily. And I intend to use that to my advantage and fight like hell to keep anyone else I can from coming in. With each word, her voice gains strength until I can fairly taste her resolve simmering in the air. The moment dies as Nadine lets out a weary sigh. The sad truth is, she says, I failed my daughter. Failed her so many times. All I can do now is try to keep kids from repeating my mistakes. Kids like you, Liz, who deserve so much more. She smiles at me and doesn't seem to realize her hologram has completely fallen away. Her eyes crinkle at the corners, and her gaze is so full of warmth and love that, for a moment, I can hardly breathe. I suddenly remember my mother holding me in her arms once when I was little, the strength and the gentleness of her embrace. This moment feels like that, a fleeting connection that still echoes like a heartbeat, giving life over and over to my fractured soul. Overwhelmed, I swallow and rub my sleeve across my eyes. Thank you, I whisper, for caring. for believing I'm worthy of saving, for not leaving me in or leading me into this dark world. Nadine looks like she has more she wants to say, but a button near her screen beeps. Her hologram pops back into place as the receptionist's voice crackles across the room. You have another interviewee waiting, Nadine. Blah, she mutters and seems to catch herself. She helps me stand and guides me to the door. You have so much to offer, Liz. Don't throw it away. She sounds so sure, so confident. Maybe I really don't need to be some villain's henchwoman. Maybe my days as a lawful citizen don't have to be over. Dazed, I wander back into the lobby, collecting my spacesuit from the locker. The receptionist takes one look at me and rolls her eyes. Not another one, Nadine, she mutters. I pass the next candidate, a tall young man pacing the room and gnawing his bottom lip. Perhaps he'll be joining me soon at the secret location. The airlock doors whoosh open, and I step through, the coordinates still ringing through my mind. I glance back to see that Nadine has followed me out. She is arguing with the receptionist as the nervous candidate wrings his hands. Overhead, the villain and hero standoff flies across the screens again. When my body stiffens, I also almost choke on an ironic laugh. I never expected to walk into a gunfight, lose, and leave with my life intact. So I leave you with henchwoman tip number 4. If you have a chance to escape or never enter the world of villainy, take it, and don't look back. Because you are more than just some villain's henchwoman, and maybe, just maybe, you deserve the chance to prove it. And that's the end of that story.
That's a really great story.
Oh, thank you.
I like the way it ends too. That she's pretty sure it's her mom, but she's not 100% sure.
Yep.
Yeah, because there's another candidate waiting.
Yeah, I left it intentionally vague. So if readers want to believe that it might be her mom, they can. Or if they think it could be someone completely different, they can believe that too. It's kind of up to the reader to decide.
Yeah. Or you could decide it is her mom and she's not totally sure that's her daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So she talks to all the candidates. That's another interpretation. That was a really fun story.
Thank you.
I think that's one of the magical things about the short story is that like in a story collection is that you finish a story and there's another one right after it. No lines, no waiting, no going back to the store. You don't have to go buy another book. You just turn the page, physical or digital, depending on where you're reading, and there's another story. And I think that's, or if it's an audiobook, you just go to the next, it just plays. The next one comes on. Which I think is like something unique to the like a short story anthology, that something like, and it's something that a regular book doesn't have, because once you're done with the book, there's no more story in the book. But in a collection like this, there's more stories. And how you said there's 22 in here. So this is one of 22. Why did you choose to read this one instead of the first one? Just out of curiosity.
So I was kind of trying to decide back and forth. I actually was trying to choose between 3 different stories.
Oh.
And yeah, so it
How
was
did you choose?
So I don't know. I think this one just was kind of calling me today. It's one of the, I'm not really shorter stories, but it's kind of in the medium length.
Mm-hmm.
So I could give like an entire story in the excerpt without having to cut it off at like a cliffhanger kind of point.
Yeah.
I think the first story in the anthology is a little bit more a little bit longer, I think, and a little bit more kind of almost slice of life cozy fantasy. So I
Okay.
wanted to just to kind of share a different genre, which is more the light sci-fi fantasy, which Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories in the collection, so I wanted to share it because of that as well. Um, and I had a lot of fun writing it and writing the story within the story and like scattering clues and stuff
Mm,
like that for readers to pick up on. So I love reading stories like that, where you have to piece clues together to kind
right,
of
right.
understand what's going on in the subtext, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
So, mhm.
And it comes through too, like in the writing and you reading it. Like I could hear how much fun you were having, both like in the writing and in you reading it to us. So it was a really magical experience.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome, and I'm really glad you shared it with our listeners because I think this is pre-recorded. We're recording this today on March 22nd, and if you'll be able to listen to it tonight, you probably most likely or tomorrow. I'm pretty fast at getting these out because you can't fall in love with the book and have to run out and buy it if you can't hear the author talk about it. So it's sitting on my hard drive taking up space, does nobody any good. So I'm pretty fast at these things. But out of the 22 stories, how many are fantasy and how many are sci-fi? Just out of curiosity, like
Oh, good
how many
question.
fall in like which buckets, genre buckets do they fall into, or I guess subgenre buckets? I think is more what we're talking about, and like roughly how many? I'm just curious, like
Oh, yeah.
how wide ranging it is. And how many
Um,
involve dragons? Because we said
yes.
unexpected encounters of a draconic
Mhm.
kind. So that's the
Yeah.
part 2 of this question. I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So, I'm trying to remember. So there's like 7 or
This is a pop
8.
quiz. No,
Yes.
it's an open book
Well,
test. You can flip through your book. It's totally fine.
I actually have a Google Doc, because initially this book is split into 2, kind of. Initially,
Oh,
it was going to be a much bigger book, with
okay.
more short stories in it, but it would have just been way too big, for a short story collection, so I ended up splitting it into 2. So I have a Google Doc kind of spreadsheet where I like list all the stories in each volume and which ones are in which genres. So if I remember correctly from my Google Doc, there should be 7 or 8 fantasy stories and then 4 or 5 science fiction, 4 or 5 comedy stories, and then 4 or 5 spooky slash thriller stories. So fantasy is the predominant
Mhm.
genre in it, with like a mingling of the other genres, but they all have light fantasy elements in them as well.
Okay. That's really neat. And you said
Hmm.
that the fantasy ones are take place in a world that you have other books set in or other
Uh,
stories set in.
a couple of just 1 or 2 of the fantasy stories. Let me see my list. So there's 2 stories in here. One's called Tiger Bright,
Mhm.
about a girl who is a tiger shapeshifter, and she has to go up against a man-eating tiger that has been stalking the villages around where she lives. So that is one story. And then No Man's Jungle is a story a little bit later in the collection that takes place in the same world, but it's not connected to those characters. They're just kind of set in the same world, but at different times in its history.
Okay.
Mhm.
And those link up with um so they link together. The
Yes.
Okay,
Just
not to
very,
anything outside of
yeah,
the
yeah.
collection.
And it's just very kind of small links. It's more for like
Okay.
the eagle-eyed readers that are like, "Oh, this place
Oh,
sounds
so you don't
familiar,"
have
you
any
know?
notes in the book about which ones connect. Oh, okay. No, it's
No, no. It's more like a little, if readers notice it, that's cool. If they don't,
okay.
it doesn't affect their enjoyment or affect anything like story-wise.
Okay. Okay. No, that's cool. No, so that's insider information you can only get in this
Mhm.
podcast. Or probably in your newsletter. I'm sure that or if you haven't, you should, like as a reader of short story anthologies. I find that interesting to know which stories connect. Do any of them connect?
Mhm.
And why the author chose to put these specific stories in this specific collection. Why did you choose these 20? Because it sounds like you wrote more than these, and these were the ones that you curated into this. So can you speak to that curation process, like how you chose? Like, did you have some kind of criteria? Was there a vibe you were going for? Were you just listening to the characters who were saying, "Pick me, pick me"?
It was a very kind of up and down roller coaster process, because initially this collection was going to be a collection of 50 flash fiction pieces. Essentially, all of the pieces that I had published through Havoc were all going to be in this one collection. And then as I started editing, I realized, you know what? I can further explore these characters, further explore these worlds, and, kind of pluck at these plot points that I couldn't explore as in a flash fiction piece because you only have 1,000 words. So then it wasn't going to be a flash fiction collection anymore. So it essentially got chopped in half. So I was going so from 50 flash fiction pieces, it got chopped down to 30. And then as I was further editing, I realized with deadlines and everything and juggling so many short stories, it just wasn't a good idea to keep it at 30. So it got chopped down further and further until finally I got to 22. And I knew I'd always wanted to do a mixture of genres because I was inspired by how Havoc does their anthologies. They publish their daily flash fiction pieces on their website, but then they choose certain ones from the daily publications to be published into a print anthology. And so they make sure to publish like fantasy, sci-fi, humor, thriller. So like I think there's another one in there too. So the 5 genres, and that's how they organize their anthologies. So when I decided I was going to make my own personal anthology, I kind of wanted to keep to that organization and I'll give readers a chance to kind of sample all the different things I like to write. And then it just kind of became about picking which stories were most ready to be in the anthology and were most most ready, most easiest to edit, I guess, at the time. I realized as I was going, it was a very touch and go process, that some stories just weren't going to work in the format that I wanted them to work in. There were a couple of humor stories that were all interconnected with the same characters, that worked really well as flash fiction pieces. But then when I tried to further expand them, it just wasn't working with my betas and my editors and such. So I ended up putting them aside, and I had to kind of choose the stories that just kind of stood on their own the strongest in this kind of new short story medium. And I knew I wanted it to kind of revolve around mythical creatures. So I tried to focus on dragons, mermaids, shapeshifters. So let me just see. I think there's 4 or 5 stories in here that have dragons, and then there's and 2 or 3 with mermaids, and then a couple more with either wolves or like wolf shifters. So yeah, that's kind of, and then of course like all around the central theme of like different encounters that change us or change our world or things like that. So yeah, it was a very hectic kind of process. I did not realize how hard it was going to be editing 20 some stories. Like editing a novel is hard, writing a novel is hard, and then kind of writing and editing like little mini ones all in one book and kind of juggling 20 worlds, 20 plot points, 20 sets of characters. Like, my brain kind of was very burnt out by the end. So I have part 2 of this collection that was supposed to come out this year, but because of my burnout, it's been pushed back to 2025. But volume 2, its theme will be kind of centering around villain stories and what makes a villain, villain redemption arcs, and it will more deeply focus on mythology and folklore, even more so than this volume, and it'll be a lot darker. So for people who like gothic and dark fantasy, it will be very much up their alley, whereas this first volume is meant to be more like more, I guess, inclusive of various genres and such.
No, that's so cool. I hope in the second one you'll include some of this information about how you chose them, why you chose them, and more and about, you know, why you know, how you, like, you know, if there was any, like, what the prompts were that because I think that's all really cool from a reader point of view. Because short stories, like, they don't exist in a vacuum. There's something precipitated, something, like you said earlier, like most people are writing books, but something triggered you to write the short story and write this specific one. And I love the anthologies that, like, tell you that, because I think that's so cool. And if they connect with, I love when they tell you that too, and then, like, you're reading it and you're like looking for it, or some of them have that at the end. They'll have a note, and you're like, oh, and I got to reread it and see if I find the things, you know. And it's kind of like, it's like at the end, like when the notes after the story, it's like, oh, it's like a mental test. You're like, okay, did I catch anything? And I think that's so neat. And also, like, why you chose the stories that you chose. Like, one of my favorite authors when I was a teenager was Mercedes Lackey, and she used to get stories from fans, and she'd put together anthologies of them, and usually there was a story from her in there, which I always thought was so neat. And there was always be, like, you know, information about, like, how this came to be. And so, like, I think that's what started my love of, like, anthologies. I have like my Audible account, I have, like, so many, like, anthologies. Like, I cannot, like, land on an anthology, like, see an anthology while scrolling through Audible and not, like, read the blurb and usually purchase it, because it's so interesting, and you get stories that you don't normally get, because you can, some of the stories don't lend themselves to a long novel, and you can explore all these little nooks and crannies that, while the world is exploding around you, characters can't stop and figure, you know, look at.
Yep.
Which
Well,
I think is so neat.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's kind of what draws me to writing these stories. Like, I'm that person who, when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, I always feel terrible for, like, the side characters, you know, the characters that are kind of like not given the spotlight, or get killed horrifically merely because they're not the main characters. So I tend to write those types of characters as main characters in my short stories. So, for example, you'll see a lot of aunt characters as main characters, because a lot of the times aunts and uncles are very rarely a main character. It's usually,
Yes,
yeah,
I
it
agree.
kind of,
I
yeah.
agree. I agree. I agree. So as an aunt, I agree.
Yep.
And-
I'm an aunt as well, and that's kind of what drove me to write those kinds of stories, like, because, you know, there's a fierce devotion and love that you feel as
yes.
an aunt or an uncle that you don't really see stories explore that very much. So I wanted to kind of take a different twist and take a different approach
Yeah.
to familial love in that sense. So you'll find at least 2 aunt stories in this collection.
And the aunts do other things when they're not aunting. when the,
Yes.
you know, and the uncles, like, you know, when they're not hanging out with their niece or nephew, like, they have an actual life. They could go on it. I also have an aunt and uncle that feature in 2 of my series.
That's
very
awesome.
prominently. One is a main character, the other one is a supporting character who keeps the main character on track.
I love that. Honestly, we need more stories like that because
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's very much underutilized and it's
It's
kind
a
of
universal
a
thing. Like
bummer.
most people
Mhm.
are an aunt or an uncle, even if it's not by blood. Like,
Mhm.
you might be like an honorary aunt or like a
Yeah.
godparent, which is kind of like an aunt, depending on like I came from an Italian family. So, oh my God, there was my aunt, but, you know, but it's just, it can be a similar kind of relationship if the
Mhm,
godparent is very
exactly.
close to the family.
Yep. No, and, so I try to explore, like, yeah, a lot of different approaches to family dynamics in this, collection. So that's another theme that kind of ties quite a few of the stories together. Um, the themes of like adoption and reconciliation between parents and children that they have been separated from for a long period of time. Those are all themes that are very important to me personally, so I wanted to explore them through speculative fiction and kind of offer hope to, even though it's like obviously a fantasy world and
Mhm.
things don't always go that way in real life, of course. I think it's important to tell those stories because I find a lot of modern science fiction, fantasy very depressing and kind of it can lack hope sometimes, and I mean more like not so much indie fantasy. I think indie fantasy is great for, having more of the hopeful, atmosphere, but I just remember when the newest Star Wars trilogy came out and when I learned that they had, the director in an interview admitted that he had split up Han and Leia just for drama, essentially. That kind of triggered something in me, and it was like you're basically playing with your viewers' emotions for no good reason. And to see that kind of like hopeless kind of storyline play out on screen really, as someone who was a child of divorce, did not that wasn't very fun for me. So I decided, I want to write stories that are the antithesis of that. I want to offer hope in those difficult situations, even if things don't end tidily. I think it's important to give readers hope that there is something better out there, especially for some of us who like struggle with mental health issues. I think being told, "Oh, everything's pointless," doesn't help in that kind of instance. So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's. But sorry for the rant there.
No, it's important to I think so often like everybody like books focus on found family, friends that become like family or actual family, but most of them are more about like found family because that's like a really big thing in there, but there's
Mhm.
not as much like one of my series has he's a single father. So he's lives in epic
Mm.
fantasy world and magical stuff happens and he's like, okay, I need to save the city, but I have a 4-year-old son that needs childcare while I do that.
That's
And
amazing.
every book I have to, that's something that we have to deal with. The little boy needs to be somebody has to watch him or he has to come help save the day. And that's kind of every parent's nightmare. You're trying to save the world and Junior wants to know what everything is. And you're like, I'm trying to concentrate here, buddy. But like that's not like I think I've read a lot of fantasy books and I've only encountered like mostly the parents leave and the kids are left home with mom or
Mhm.
some very rarely is it mom who leaves the kids with dad. Usually it's dad goes away and the kids are left there and we never see them again until maybe the very end. And they just exist. Like it's like we pause them when he leaves in the adventure
Mm.
and unpause them, take it off pause when he returns.
Yes.
I'm like, that's not like and I think some of that came out of the fact that like a lot of the early fantasy stories and things were written during like World War II, after World War One, when like
Mhm.
that was like a thing, like your dad could have gone off to war and didn't come back, or fathers went off to work and mom took care of the kids. But like that's sort of changed, and like I like that you're exploring that in fantasy, that because it's our society has changed. Like that's not a thing anymore. Like
Mhm.
dad doesn't go off to work and leave the kids home with mom. Now like the kids may be in daycare while both parents work and are off having their corporate adventures, or dad might stay home with the kids and mom may go off on her corporate adventure
Mhm.
and come back to them, like, or they may stay with an aunt or a cousin, or like there's so many different family dynamics. And
Mhm.
it's sort of, I find it frustrating as well, like that fantasy doesn't reflect that in a lot of it's you go off and leave your family and make friends and they become your new family. It's like, well, what about your old family? Like
You
you
can
can't
have
all be
both.
orphans and come from horrible backgrounds. Like is
Yeah.
like you can't be a hero and have, parents and siblings and, so I was like, no, you can be we can have heroes that have families.
Yes, we can have both. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those kind of wonderful things about, as much as I am kind of sad that so much of, like, a lot of, uh modern, like, mainstream fantasy
Mm,
seems to be so, like, grimdark. I am very grateful that there is such, like, a wide variety of subgenres that we can explore now. So, while while we have the grimdark, we can also, like, explore the cozy and explore, like, urban fantasy and all these other ones and bring these new approaches to family dynamics within those genres,
mhm.
which we might not have been able to have, like, even 20 years ago. So,
No, I mean, you're right. And I think I think having fantasy stories show a greater depth and breadth of like situations and dynamics within and without family. Like, I think it makes them more relatable because, like, how many of us are orphans who are, a magic sword showed up for us? Like,
mm,
like it's 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 a lot of disbelief, but like you pick up a book or a short story and someone is an aunt or an uncle like you, or has actual family and needs to go off and save the day, and maybe their family decides to come with them because it sounds more interesting whenever they were going to be doing, or they'd like to continue living and they're not sure that you're quite capable of saving the world without help. So it's like, how many parents would just let their kids go off and be like, bye, save the world, we'll see you when like, how many of them are not going to be like, you have the life experience of a tomato plant. You've never left this community. You're going to go off and save the world. No. You're going to need help.
family
Lots
road
of
trip.
help. Yeah, really, like really, how many parents will let their teenager go off and save the world, not be like, I'm packing a bag and coming with you because there's no way this
Mhm.
world is getting saved if I don't play an active role in this. You know?
Yup. And I guess that's the reason why so many parents or mentor characters tend to get killed off in fantasies, because, you know, authors or
I
editors
hate
or
that.
whoever
I
doesn't
hate
want them
that. It's
tagging along on the journey and,
because they don't
becoming
want
the
to
main
deal with it.
character.
Yeah, they don't want to
But
deal with that, and I don't do that. The characters don't get mentors, and they have to just, because who gets? I mean, that's not real life. We don't get mentors. It's very rare that you get a mentor in life. Like
mm,
most of us are just struggling along, trying to figure out what's going on. We've got our little flashlight, and we can only see a few feet ahead of us, and we don't know what's to the right
mm,
and to the left unless we turn the flashlight, and we can't see what's coming at us. We don't have, I mean, I've never had a mentor. I don't know anybody who has. I know people who have paid to have mentors, but I don't.
mm.
That's not the same thing as like in a fantasy context where people show up and offer their help for free,
Yeah.
because they want to help you. So that's not the same thing as paying for a mentor. A mentor you're paying for wants to help you because you are paying them, not because they actually want to help you. Um, but yeah, and like I don't like the whole mentorship thing. It's one of those tropes in fantasy that I hate because it's so unreal. This is not, if this was real life, they'd want you to pay them a sack of gold and then they would mentor you, but they're not going to do anything dangerous. They're not going to actually accompany you on this dangerous mission. They will give you the training, they will give you some knowledge and send you off on your way. Okay, let me know when it's over. I'll be over in, somewhere far away. So if you screw it up, I'll toast to you a memory. I think that would be more real than, the Dumbledores of the world. They're just, maybe there's one of them in every, somewhere, but like it's not.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have any mentor characters in any of these stories, and
I just don't. My characters have to struggle along and figure things out. Somebody might volunteer to teach them something, but that person is getting something out of it. Like in one story I have, one book series I have, the one character decides to mentor this other one because he's afraid that this other character who has all this magic is going to collapse the mountain on them. He's doing it out of self-preservation. Because if you know how to control your magic, I will continue to survive. And he doesn't get involved when things get dangerous or monsters show up. He's like, I'll be over here where it's not dangerous, where there's no possibility of things falling on me. I'm allergic to danger. Is one of his lines. I feel like that's a more realistic depiction of sort of because I don't know. These are not dark fantasy either. They're like humorous, epic fantasy, but not dark. Oh, that's how I approach it. I don't know. All those mentor things, it's like when you're reading the book and the mentor shows up, you're like, all right, let's check that off. All right. So then next the mentor gets killed. Okay, check that box. Like it becomes very predictable, the story. And I hate that. I don't like when I know what's going to happen. So I like when there's no mentor and you're like, oh, now what are we going to do? How are you going to figure out how to do anything?
Yeah, I think I avoid that as well, mostly in the fact that I don't, other than a few exceptions, I don't tend to write what can be construed as YA fantasy. And I think it's almost very much more a YA fantasy trope than anything else. And I've gotten much further away from YA fantasy. I consider my books to be kind of they're adult fantasy, but like with YA crossover appeal. I try to keep it kind of accessible to as wide a range an audience as possible. Mm-hmm. But I definitely wouldn't categorize it as YA. So if anything, the mentor would be the main character in my stories. So, and it would be the upstart young child would be like the secondary character. Because I tend to gravitate towards writing older characters anyways. Quite a few of my next book ideas after I finish part 2 of this collection revolve around characters like in their mid to late 20s, and one of them even has someone who's almost 40. So yeah, those are kind of the characters I like to write about, kind of the world weary not middle aged, but like
old enough to know better,
approaching middle age.
Yeah, old enough to know better, but still gonna go on the adventure anyways because you still think you're young and limber enough to get away with it.
Their own nobility drags them into it.
Yeah. No, I like that you write from the mentor's point of view, because it's not a point of view that we get all that often. It's usually we're in the mind of the young upstart, and I'm doing a lot of eye rolling. Because it's usually so cliche, like you know exactly what they're gonna do, and I think that's why I like Lord of the Rings so much. Gandalf is the mentor. He dies, but then he just gets an upgrade and comes back, and they don't know he's back. He just kind of goes off and does his own thing, but then eventually meet up, and he's like, well, yeah, of course I'm back. Why were you worried?
Yeah, Gandalf's a very relatable character,
Yeah.
just going around calling everyone fools.
Yeah, and by all their names. Yeah, like I liked him, like the irascible mentor. You can't, even the Balrog couldn't kill him. I like that. I like that Tolkien was like, nah, he's too cool to die. Let's just upgrade him.
I approve.
I do too, because that's such a fun twist that the mentor like comes back, doesn't even go and find his friends and tell them. He's like, they're probably fine. I'm not even going to check in on them magically or otherwise. I'm going to go over here and save Rohan because that's what I feel like I need to be doing right now. um, so I like that. He just jumps back in with his own agenda, He's like, all right, we did the mentor thing, box checked, onwards to the next point. Like, it never felt like in that particular story, like the typical, it's definitely not a typical fantasy story. And yes, he is the mentor, but like, they're on it's his mission. Like and Frodo's not that young. He's like 50 in the story.
No.
Yeah. And he's not a young upstart, and he's going because Gandalf tells him he has to go. And then he was like, all right, go. I'll meet you in Bree. We'll see ya. Get there when you get there. I'll meet you up there. And he doesn't show. Like, it's not the typical mentor relationship, which I like. But they're also adults, so I like that. I don't know. And that one, it works because he's got his own agenda. He has his own agency. He's not just there to prop up the main character, because the main character is kind of doesn't know anything. They don't know anything, but he's like, yeah, they'll figure it out. I'll send someone to help them, and I just won't tell them that he's coming. And the whole way that they meet Aragorn, and like, I don't know. I find that very funny. He's like, they'll be fine. But we've gotten way off topic. I'm a little like wired from the workday, so like,
no worries.
Totally sorry that I'm bouncing all over. So all right, so you're working on the second anthology right now. Well, you're taking a break from it at the moment, but I hope that like in your break time that you'll chronicle some of the like why behind the scenes stuff, because like I think speaking for myself, who is a lover of anthologies, I love that stuff. I like knowing what the author was thinking, why they chose these stories, why they arranged them in this particular order. And like if any of them link together, and like just their thought process on it. Because I think that's just with story collection, because it shows a range. It also shows different. I feel like it's in a book you get some of the author, but in a sort of story collection you get a lot of the author. You're seeing different sides of them, different things that they want to convey, and like I feel like you get a deeper connection with the author in reading that and knowing what they were thinking at that time. So I love all that like behind the scenes stuff. So maybe while you're burnt out, you could chronicle some of that, because it's interesting.
Yeah. Yep. I'm definitely I've been jotting down like notes for the introduction. The introduction to volume 2 to kind of like explain the thought processes behind some of the stories and everything. And a lot of them, quite a few of them, are going to be completely original. They haven't been published elsewhere before. So I'll have, I'm adding, there's quite a few Greek mythology inspired stories that I'm planning to write for it.
So those would be your own prompts.
Yeah. So, because I've been kind of enthralled by the Antigone play ever since I read it for university years ago. And so I have an idea for a sci-fi, kind of almost space opera-esque retelling of it.
The Antigone one, that's the one where she and her father, I know I read it in like high school. That was like 20 years ago. That's the one where they're driven out of the city. And she already knows it? Or is it the other? There's more than one Antigone play.
So that's the one where her brothers rebel against the ruler of the city, and they're forbidden from giving them a proper burial, and she goes ahead and buries I think it was one of the brothers was a traitor, so she buries the traitorous brother and then kind of gets in trouble for it. And most of the play is kind of going back and forth about like whether she'll die or whether she should kind of like, I guess, recant her
Mhm.
actions. So always been I've been kind of obsessed with that play and like the idea of um kind of your autonomy in choice and the idea of respecting the body and the dignity of the human body that I believe that we're created with and made with, especially when we consider just how divided our society has become, and how it's so easy to kind of dismiss other people just because we disagree with them and
Mhm.
kind of forget like they're human too. Um, and so it's kind of exploring those themes and how far humans will go to dehumanize each other and kind of how far we have to go to give them their humanity back. So,
I always felt like bad for Antigone and her brothers because like they were totally innocent. Like they exist because their father decided to defy prophecy, but then he
mhm,
ended up by defying it, he brought it about, and then found out about it. They were kids, and I think if I'm remembering the play correctly, they were there as children when he found out that he had married his mother and had kids, and then freaked out, ripped out his eyes, and
yeah,
um, like they lost both their parents effectively because she did not react well. His mom,
mhm,
I think she committed suicide. I don't
yeah,
remember exactly. Um, it's like, and then they're just kind of left like shunned and shamed by society as children, and like I always felt bad for them because they're innocent victims. Like they
mhm,
didn't have a say in any of this. I'm sure they would have said, "Look, Dad, just don't fight the prophecy because it might not even come true if he had just stayed there and not
yep,
left and changed so much that he doesn't recognize his own parents and they don't recognize him." Yeah, very heavy and very sad. um no, but that's cool that you're doing a retelling about them. I hope they have a better end.
um, I won't give spoilers, but, it's it's a heavier story,
Okay.
amongst the ones in that collection. So, but I won't say too much because who knows? The ending might change. So,
Right. And sometimes the plot doesn't survive the characters.
exactly.
They can change things. They have agency.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Is that the only project that you're working on right now? Or is there
Let
anything
me
else waiting in
see.
the wings?
So that's my main project right
Mhm.
now. I am actually releasing a short story in 2 days. On Sunday, it's my birthday, and I decided to
Oh,
do
happy
a
birthday.
little thank you. I decided to do a little kind of surprise release. So that day is the official launch date of The Spindle Trap, which is my um little retelling of Sleeping Beauty and kind of crossing it over with the Parent Trap movie.
Oh,
Yeah, it's, inspired by the 1998 version of The Parent Trap because I was obsessed with it as a child. So I
is that the one
decided
with the Olsen twins?
Lindsay Lohan.
Oh, Lindsay Lohan. Okay.
Yes, yeah. And so I just kind of got the idea of, oh, well, what if the Sleeping Beauty character decided to bring her curse about herself? Like, what if she pricked her finger on the spindle on purpose? Like, what would be the reasoning behind that? And then I was like, well, what if she was trying to save her family? And it's like, well, why would she need to save her family? And it's like, well, maybe there are some like meddling courtiers who are trying to split the king and queen apart. And so she brings it about where it's just her and her family left in the castle at the time that the curse is going to be fulfilled. And so she brings about the curse to kind of sweep her family away into the future, away from the people that are trying to split them apart. And the story follows that adventure and basically kind of the secrets that come out when she wakes up and things aren't quite what she thought they were.
Oh, does she have to deal with Prince Charming too, or she just wakes up
Yes.
by other
Yep.
means?
Nope, she does. She's kind of a planner though, so she had things all arranged, um, and everything, so she wouldn't just be kissed by some random stranger. So yeah, that's I
And
wanted to.
she didn't have to wait 100 years, or I don't remember what
Uh,
the.
no, no, she has to wait 100 years. It's yeah. I don't want to give away the entire plot,
How do you plan
but
100 years in advance?
it's not so much. She has some uh immortal connections.
I see.
So,
I see. That
yep,
makes sense then, because you know
yep,
this person will be around then, and you can put something in place so that it's eventually they will have need of. There will be some reason to come here and break the
yep,
spell. They need something, want something, you know, something or something.
yep. So, yeah, so that launches on Sunday. Um, and then I
That's going to be
have
separate from the collection, or will that be part of the collection?
no, that will be separate. So
Okay.
it's going to be its own ebook, and it will have like a very small little paperback. Whenever I get a cover file back, one of my friends is helping me out to put the paperback cover together. So yeah,
They can be tricky, especially with like a
yes.
very thin book. The spine can be very tricky.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yep.
wish you much luck with that. The thinnest
Thank
I've
you.
had is 150 pages, and that was just this. Everything was fine. It was just the spine and figuring out like what can I fit in this minuscule space?
Oh
Is it worth
yes.
putting something on the spine and going through the hell and having the very real possibility, overwhelming possibility, that it will slide onto the back or slide
Mm-hmm.
onto the front, because it's so there's
Yep.
so little margin. And with print on demand, like you need, even with like thicker books, like you have to leave a
Mm-hmm.
margin. But on a thin
Yep.
book you do not have any margin to spare.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah,
I've done this one other time. So I have a short Cinderella retelling out, and I just left the spine blank.
yeah,
Um, I wasn't going to put a paperback together for that one, but then I figured, you know what, some people only read paperback, so I wanted
yeah.
that option to be available for whoever wanted it. But for the most part, most of my sales are ebook, but it's nice just to have that option available because yeah, some people just prefer that, and it's a very cute little shiny paperback, so I can like give it out, when I go to conferences and stuff and kind of sell it cheap and have it as like a little grab bag kind of thing.
Yeah, because I don't think readers know this, but we pay, the printing cost goes by page count. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter what the size of the book is, whether it's 6 by 9 or 5 by 8. It's how you the printing we the printing charge is just strictly goes by how many pages are in the book. So less
Mm.
pages, less printing cost. And then because the way that we have to price paperbacks is like the printer, which in this case would be Amazon, tells you, okay, the print cost is this, our thing is this. You can't put the price below X number, and then we would add a
Mhm.
few dollars for a royalty onto that. But most of the price that you pay for a paperback does not go to the author. Like
No,
the vast
no.
majority of it like goes to um Amazon or Barnes and Noble or
Yep.
wherever you're buying it. A very small part goes to authors, but then we get to hold it in our hands. So we also get the
Exactly.
satisfaction of going, I made this. My blood, sweat,
Exactly.
and tears brought this into life. But yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about Unexpected Encounters of,
Um,
I lost the title of my brain, of
oh,
a
no worries.
Draconic Kind and Other Stories, or anything else that you're writing about right now?
No, I think that's it. Trying to think.
Yeah, because we've been talking for a while. It's like I just realized it's almost an hour and a half, and I'm like, oh, let me just check in, see how she's doing. she did say earlier you're having burnout, and like I don't want to contribute to that.
No worries.
And we have been talking for a while because it's been a fun podcast.
It has. It's been great.
I hope this refilled the creative well.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And,
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I don't think I have anything else to say, but thank you for having me, and it's been great chatting books and everything.
Yeah, come back with the next one.
I would love to.
Yeah, and if you want to give me after this ends a link to the story that's coming out on your birthday, and again, happy birthday. My birthday was on March 10th, so happy birthday, fellow March person. So yeah, I can include that in there since we were talking about it.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. And this has been another episode of Fantasy Lore and More. I've been Melinda Kucsera, your host. And today we had Beka Gremikova, and we were primarily talking about unexpected encounters of a draconic kind and other stories, but we always veer widely and talk about many other things. So I hope you'll join us in another episode, another fantasy author. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I forget what they call it in the podcasting. Do the thing so that you get notified, whatever that is called, on Spotify or wherever you're listening. Thank you so much. Have a great day or great night wherever you are.